Hey folks, walk with me. Well, trauma is an overused term these days. Trauma, people talk about, I lost my job and it was traumatizing. The trauma isn't an event. Trauma can be traced to an event, but an event is just an event. Same event can happen to two different people. One can be traumatized and one can be not traumatized. The trauma is the wound that you're left with, the unhealed, unprocessed wound that you're left with, that you carry over time because you were unable to deal with the thing that was happening, whatever that event was. You could not cope with it, you couldn't handle it, and it never got processed, it never got dealt with. That's the trauma. And I've put out videos before on signs of trauma. If you're watching this and you haven't seen that, that might be of interest to you, signs that you have a traumatic past. But it can be hard for people who experienced events that led to trauma to even acknowledge that they are suffering from trauma and need to treat it as such. That's the important thing, I think, here in the acknowledging. If you have trauma that is dictating much of your life, if you don't acknowledge it, I'm not saying it's your fault that you don't acknowledge it. I'm saying if you can't find a way to realize, oh, it's legitimate trauma, I need to name it, I need to come to terms with that, and I need to start my treatment. I need to start my path forward as being one that is focused around trauma and healing from trauma. If you can't acknowledge it, you can't ever get on that path to healing from trauma, then I think you're probably going to get, maybe you can do some good work on the surface. Maybe a layer below the surface, whatever. But I think you're going to have a really hard time feeling like there's substantive, long-lasting change. And so that's where I think the importance of identifying and acknowledging trauma. And if you have a lot of questions around, I feel like I might be suffering from trauma, but I don't know. You very well may be. That may be the biggest sort of, hello, we're waving a flag here. We're trying to inform you of something. You need to pay attention. You need to go toward that. And maybe you'll find out not. But at least you'll find out. And so leaning into that, going toward it, and trying to figure it out, I think is the most important thing. And if you've just sort of let something run in the background, things that were tremendously impactful things that happened to you in your life, and that maybe based on your age or based on your situation at the time, that you never dealt with it. That you never processed it. Yes, you probably need to acknowledge that event now lives in you as trauma. And you need to just start from where you are now. That's where you are. That's where you need to start. One thing that I'll do is a slight side road, but I think is very, very connected, that might give you an opportunity if you're struggling with this. One of the reasons that I think people struggle with acknowledging their trauma sometimes is because they were told from the people that would have helped them process. I'm thinking about like young adults or children who go through things and they're like built-in caretakers, right? Their parents or their grandparents or their guardians, whomever those people are. If they did things to lead you to believe that event wasn't that big of a deal, right? Let's just not talk about it. Let's not amplify it. Let's not give it more airtime because that'll just make it worse. You might continue to do that today because that's what you were told. This isn't that big of a deal. The more visibility you give it, the worse it's going to be. And so just move past it. Circumnavigate it. You could very well be minimizing this, especially if you know what it is. And you could see how it could be traumatizing. But people tried to convince you all along because they didn't know how to process it. They were unwilling to help you process it, whatever. Coming to acknowledge that and just say, oh, I'm carrying other people's water here. This is something that they were trying to convince me of, but this isn't my reality. This isn't how I truly experience this thing. And just be able to say, okay, that was their thing, not my thing. I need to go and start to repair this. I need to start to work through this. I think that's a huge, huge first step. But without that acknowledging piece, just going to walk around with it. And you're very likely going to be operating on a code base and a program that you have no idea that you're running. Or maybe you have a smidge of an idea. Like I said, that thing that you're like, feels like it was a pretty big event, but I was told that it wasn't. Or I was told that it's over and it's not a big deal. It's that. So those are my 2 cents. Lean into that. If there's anything to lean into that. And if you find out that you did process it and it's not sort of running the show, then cool. You can move on to other things. But I think it's worth a look. All right, folks. A smidge over 7 minutes. If you walked with me, if you didn't, I appreciate you watching this far. And as always, I will see you in the next video.